Okay, welcome to today's lesson. It's the 1st of April 2026, and this is the first class where we actually go over and revise all the chapters. We're going to start with chapter 4, research methods. Now, this is not a normal quick revision. We're not going to go over things quickly. We will do that again towards the end of this month. Today's lesson is more about explaining the concepts again slowly. So this is a very slow, very calm session where we go over all the ideas. Now, we do have many participants in this meeting. However, you guys can actually open the mics and you can ask your questions after we are done explaining the whole thing. If you have any question, write it in the chat box, and we will get back to it during the Q&A session immediately after this one. The plan you guys have will involve us going over chapter 4 slowly. So every lesson is going to be about one of the lessons in chapter 4. Chapter 4 consists of, it has 8 lessons in it, and today we're going to cover only the first one. In addition to this, you need to understand that chapter 4 will be featured in section D of the exam paper. So as you guys know, the exam paper is divided into 4 sections. Section D of the exam paper in both papers 1 and 2 is going to be dedicated to chapter 4. So if you open paper 1, it says section A, B, C. That would actually correspond to chapters 1, 2, 3, and then section D is chapter 4. You open paper 2 and it has chapter 4 again. And the reason why it does that, it's because chapter 4 is the heaviest chapter in terms of weight and grades and marks and the whole thing. This is worth 25% of the entire subject. This is 50 out of 200. So we're going to take it really slowly with this chapter, and we're going to go step by step in order to finish the whole thing again. And then we will have a quick revision where we don't explain everything in detail the same way we're doing it today. So let's have a look at today's topic. Today's topic is called research methods, and we're going to discuss what research methods are. We're going to have a look at this, understand the key terminology, and go over the whole thing from the beginning. Now, chapter 4 again is the most important one, and once we're done with the 8 lessons, we will have 2 dedicated lessons where we solve all the past papers about chapter 4. So all the section Ds about chapter 4 in both papers 1 and 2. This is June 2026. So far we only have 4 official past papers, specimens 1 and 2, June 25 and November 25. We have 4 of those for paper 2. So this means we have 8 different exam papers about chapter 4, and we're going to solve all of those during the Q&A sessions. But you won't be able to understand the Q&A sessions if you don't pay attention to today's lesson. So let's dive into it. Chapter 4, research methods. What's the story about research methods, and what is it all about? Technically speaking, today's lesson is all about the experimental method, and it's going to dive. Today is 4.1. So as I have previously explained, we have 4.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Today, we're going to talk about chapter 4.1 only, or lesson 4.1, which is the experimental method. The objective of today's lesson, like what should we actually do? What should be done by the end of this lesson? By the end of this lesson, you guys will be able to understand variables, like what's the meaning of variables, and also formulate, which means create testable hypothesis. One of the most common questions in the exam is to actually write a hypothesis, and you are going to learn how to do that today. You will also understand different experimental designs and how they can actually be used in research, and understand the strength and weakness of different experimental designs. Some experimental designs are very strong, some of them have weaknesses, and some of them have, all of them actually have their own strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to study that together. And finally, we will understand what is meant by standardized procedure, like what is a procedure that can be, a standard one, like a standardized one. Technically speaking, pretty interesting. So think of this lesson in a way like learning the rules of a game before you play the game. You need to know how to design a fair test. You really need to, before you can actually act like a scientist. So that's the purpose of the lesson, teaching you how to design a fair test. You will also be able to understand all the different types of variables, including extraneous variables, their possible effect, how to control them, and you will understand randomization, allocation, and counterbalancing. Pretty interesting. So let's have a look at this together. First of all, before we dive into the lesson is dense. It is a little bit heavy. Before we actually go into the lesson, we're going to learn how to keep our, um, you know, experiments fair by actually understanding the terminology first. So let's understand the terminology first. Let's go over the key terms, all of the key terms. And then once we're done understanding the key terms, we will be able to understand the lesson itself as we explain it. So technically speaking, what I need you guys to understand is these are the words that I'm going to be using a lot today. So these are the key terms. So let's have a look at the first one. The first one is the word experiment. So what's meant by experiment? An experiment is a research method in which the researcher tries to control all the different variables. So I'm trying to control all the different variables other than the independent variable, or as we say, the IV, and the dependent variable, the DV. Now, what is meant by independent and dependent? This is something we are going to discuss in a second, but it allows the researcher to identify a cause and effect relationship between the IV and the DV. So technically speaking, an experiment is the whole idea of trying to control everything except for the IV and DV, okay, in order to see how these two have a cause and an effect relationship with one another. So if you're testing, for example, a plant growth, okay, and the IV is the type of fertilizer you use, and that's something to keep in mind. So it's the type of, the fertilizer, and the DV is, technically speaking, what is affected. Now, a hypothesis is very important because so many people don't really understand what a hypothesis is. And by the way, I'm not explaining the lesson yet. This is me just going over the words. Once we're done doing that, once we're done discussing the key terms, we will dive into the lesson, and these key terms will start to make more sense. A hypothesis is a testable statement. So it's a statement that can be testable about the relationship. So it's a testament about the relationship between two different variables, the IV and the DV. That's something to keep in mind. Now, finally, what is a null hypothesis? A null hypothesis. So it's a hypothesis that exists and states that no variables, affect any other variable. So if we have a null hypothesis, it's like saying nothing will happen. A null hypothesis is a default statement that states nothing will happen. This doesn't actually affect this. So when you say a null hypothesis, you're technically saying that nothing will happen. The variables will not impact one another. No variables affect any other variables. Now, the word variable itself actually stands for factors or things that change. So the word variable means to vary. To vary means to change. An independent variable is the factor that will be changed in an experiment to look for an effect on the other variables. So the independent one is the one I'm tweaking, is the one I'm changing. The IV is the one I'm changing. It's the one I'm playing with to see the impact on the other variables. So to explain the relationship between them, I first have to tell you what a DV is, and then I'm going to give you a slight example. The DV is the factor that will be measured in the experiment to see if changing the IV has had an effect. So I change the IV to measure any changes on the DV. The factor that will be measured is your dependent variable. And to help you understand this better, I need to actually think of an idea here. Okay, I need to think of an idea. Let's talk about music and studying. Let's talk about music and study. So technically speaking, to explain this, let's talk about music and studying. People studying with music and people studying without music. Okay? If I want to test this, like which one of them is the independent variable and which one of them is the DV? Okay? What do they even mean? Music and no music. What's the difference between them? Again, let's go over this. So technically speaking, we have IV and DV, right? And IV is the factor that I'm changing to see the effect on other variables. The DV is the factor that will be measured in an experiment. So if I'm doing an experiment where people listen to music while studying, and then once they're done, they have a test of some sorts, what is my IV in this experiment? I'm going to open your mics, guys. If anyone knows, what is the IV in the experiment? Yeah,
الIV هيكون الsong.
the music.
أيوه music.
Absolutely great. So whether we play music or not, right? And what are we measuring? What is the DV?
الeffect على study.
Okay, whether students were able to study or not. Let's talk about the plant sample I gave you when I said like the IV would be the fertilizer. The DV would be measuring how high the plant gets. Okay, so that's it. So, for example, trial one, I only use water. Trial B, I use a fertilizer. So the fertilizer is the IV that I'm tweaking with. You know, I'm changing whether I add a fertilizer or not to see whether the plant would grow or not. And that is my DV. My DV is the plant growth. My IV is the fertilizer. So the IV is what I tweak. The DV is what is changed. That's it. I hope you guys do get it. I'm still not explaining it. We're still going over the key factors. Now, the key terms, sorry. Now we have condition. What is the meaning of the word condition? A condition is an experiment that is organized. So there are two different trials. And after which the performance of the participants is compared. So I repeat the same thing twice, but I repeat it under different conditions, two different trials, and then I actually compare what happened in the first set and what happened in the second set. These trials are the conditions of the experiment. And technically speaking, a condition is me changing some elements to see how both trials can be compared to one another. Now, an alternative hypothesis is the hypothesis that the researcher tests by conducting a study and collecting data. The alternative hypothesis attempts to show that the null hypothesis is not supported. So what does the null hypothesis say? The null hypothesis says some things. I said it a second ago. What does it say? Can anyone tell me what does the null hypothesis say? Just open the mic and tell me, what is the null hypothesis? Yes, Mariam Ayman, in
It's
English.
a hypothesis that states that the variables have no effect on the
Okay,
experiment.
so nothing will happen.
Yes,
Changing IV will not affect the DV. Nothing will happen.
yes,
Okay, so an alternative hypothesis is the hypothesis the researcher tests to show that the null one is not supported, that the null one is not actually supported, that there is an effect. Something is indeed affecting another thing. Okay? So that's an alternative hypothesis. Again, it's a hypothesis that the researcher tests by conducting a study and collecting data. And the purpose of this is to show that the null hypothesis, the hypothesis that says nothing will happen, is not supported. And then we have something called experimental design, how the participants are used in conditions of an experiment and how they are organized. Independent groups, where two or more separate groups of participants are actually used in an experiment, and each group takes part in one of the conditions. So we have multiple conditions and we have multiple independent groups. And you guys will understand this better when I get into the lesson. And you know, a couple of more key terms. We have repeated measures, where only one group of participants is used, but this group of people actually go through both conditions. So instead of having 10 people and then I divide them over two groups, 5 and 5, and each group takes, goes through the study under different conditions, it's technically one group and I use only one group, and that group goes through both conditions. And this is a problem. The repeated measure is a problem because the order of the conditions may affect the end result. So the group is the same group of people, and this, let's imagine they are people, and we're conducting the study on people, and then we use the same group of people and we put them through two different conditions. Technically, the order of which those conditions take place might actually affect the end result. So that's the problem with repeated measures. I am doing the same experiment, I'm conducting the same experiment on the same group, but I'm doing it under two different conditions. And the order of which I actually expose them to these conditions might affect the whole thing. Now, matched pairs, where people with similar qualities are grouped into pairs, and then each member of the pair takes part in a different condition. So I have like two females, same age, same background. I put them in a pair, and then each one of them actually goes through the experiment, but under different conditions to see the impact of those different conditions. Now, the order effect is something that I was just speaking about. I already spoke about the order effect when I was talking about the repeated measure. The order effect is when when a participant performance is in the second condition of an experiment is affected because they have already done the first condition. So this is related to the repeated measures because I have the same group of people, and this group of people takes part in both conditions. And maybe this is a problem because when a participant's performance in the second condition is affected because they have already done the first one, so we don't really know whether their performance is 100% their performance or whether it was actually impacted, impaired, negatively impacted, or maybe positively impacted, we don't show, by the first trial. So technically speaking, to mitigate the impact of the order effect, we would have, again, two groups, and each group would go through repeated measures. So each separate group would have to go through the experiment twice under two different conditions, but the first group would actually have to go through condition A and then B, whereas the second one would go through B and then A. So people may do better because of practice, or maybe do worse because they are tired. This may happen in a repeated measure design. That's why I connected them together. Now, finally, we have participant variables. The differences between the people who take part in a study. People themselves are different, and these may affect the results of an experiment because any experiment that uses an independent group design. What is, again, an independent group design? An independent group is where two or more separate groups of people are used in an experiment. And each group takes part in one condition, and that's the problem. What if that group has variables in its participants that we were not aware of? So technically speaking, Farid Al-Hilali is asking, do we have these as definitions? Yes, you do. And you have to know them, and you have to know what do they mean, and you have to be able to define them and give an example. The last set of key terms, I promise, before we actually go into the lesson, is standardized procedure, which is a set of order of carrying out a study that is applied to all the participants when necessary. An order of carrying out the study that is applied to everyone when necessary. Now, we have extraneous variables, and these are EVs. A variable that is not an independent one, but it might be affected by the dependent variable. Okay? So I'm trying to measure the impact of the dependent variable, changing the dependent variable. How will it affect my IV? Well, your dependent variable doesn't only impact the IV, it can sometimes impact the EV, which is the extraneous variable, which is a variable that you didn't even, count or know of, or actually not controlled in most cases. So if you don't really control your EV, it might mess up with the whole experiment. Now, instructions are written or verbal information given to participants during any experiment. Randomization is using random chance, to provide an order for the procedure. And random allocation to conditions, it's a way to avoid bias when allocating participants to conditions. So technically speaking, instead of me choosing these people will go through condition A and these people will go through condition B, no, random allocation is somehow, it avoids bias, but it's not 100% accurate because We can't control the EVs, and these are the extraneous variables in this method. But what is random allocation? It's a way of avoiding bias. When we allocate participants to different conditions, each participant must have an equal chance of being in either condition A or B. And each participant randomly chooses from a number 1 to 20, and then participants who select an odd number will go to condition 1, and those who select an even number, for example, will go to condition 2. Technically speaking, there's a problem with it because the standardized procedure, in my opinion, which is the first key term here, um, is like reading the exact same instructions from a script to every single participant so that nobody gets extra hints. That's a standardized procedure. I'm trying to make things easier here. Now, technically speaking, if you're talking about the word hypothesis, the one we discussed earlier, and the null hypothesis, what I need you guys to understand is it's like a null hypothesis is like a grumpy judge. It's like someone who's upset with you somehow. It's like a grumpy judge, like someone who's like, nothing's gonna happen. Okay, it assumes nothing. It assumes that your big idea about the DV affecting the IV, uh, isn't really a thing, and nothing will happen. That's your IV. Okay, so what's the purpose of it? The purpose of the whole thing, the null hypothesis you're saying, Mariam, the purpose of the null hypothesis is it's your base, it's your starting line. You're saying, you know what, nothing will happen. There is no impact by changing this on this. And then your absolute research actually proves that the null hypothesis is wrong, or yes, something did impact something. So the null hypothesis is your base, is your starting line. It's like the DV will not affect the IV. That's it. I write this down, and then I start proving how the DV will affect the IV. So what's the purpose of, Mariam Ayman is asking, what's the purpose of the null hypothesis? Well, technically speaking, you can actually say something like, TV before bed ruins your sleep. The grumpy judge would say, no, it doesn't ruin sleep. Nothing will happen if you watch TV before the bed. And the null hypothesis is practically someone telling you you're wrong, and you have to actually prove them right. So the null hypothesis is that grumpy judge telling you you're wrong, and you do all of your research to prove them. Your job is to actually prove that your hypothesis is right and that the null hypothesis is wrong. That's it. So it's like your fictional enemy, or the person against you, that says your dependent variable will not affect your independent one. Mariam says, can I look at the null hypothesis like a motivation to get the whole thing started? Yes, you can. So we move on to counterbalancing, which is an arrangement in which half of the participants in an experiment are given conditions in one order, and the other participants are given the conditions in an opposite order, so that we mitigate the impact of the order. Ecological validity is something that you say all the time in psychology, which is the results of an investigation that can be said to apply to the real life behavior around the world. They are accurate account of behavior in the real world. So if something is not an accurate account of behavior in the real world, we say it's not ecologically valid, because this means it doesn't apply to the whole world. This is us only explaining the key terms. So these are the terms I'm going to be using in the lesson. I hope you guys get them. If you have any questions about the key terms, ask me now. Don't ask hypothetical questions, and keep it in English, please. Anything about these, the key terms? Nothing. Okay, cool. So let's move on. Oh, we have a question here. Malak, can you keep it in English, please? Thank you.
Can my hypothesis be a question and not a statement?
Oh, why? Why?
Can it be
Why?
like, does TV affect sleep if you watch it before you go to bed?
Okay. You're asking because you've solved the past paper before and you didn't get the mark. Let's be
Mhm.
honest, right? You wrote it as a question, didn't you?
Mhm.
So my question is, after you didn't get the mark, what do you think?
I don't think so, but at the same time, I can't generate a statement. I can't think of how to structure it as an answer.
Okay, well, you are right. I'm going to be honest with you. A hypothesis is not a question, and it really cannot be a question. It must be always a declarative statement. Okay, so it's a research question in your mind. You actually derived your hypothesis from a question in your mind. Okay, but the hypothesis is an educated guess, okay, a prediction, a testable statement that if something happens, okay, so technically speaking, it suggests a relationship between two variables, like this will do that, this will lead to this, changing this will change this. Your hypothesis, the whole idea is um, about you stating that something will affect something. If you write a question, you're not writing a hypothesis, you're writing a research question, which is technically where you start with your hypothesis. So a research question is a question that actually asks what the study will investigate. Okay, so for example, saying, does TV before sleep affect sleep quality? That's then a research question. Okay,
Mhm.
a hypothesis is technically speaking a declarative statement that states the expected answer, which is if people watch TV before bed, their quality of sleep will be reduced. So it's like an answer to your research question. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so a hypothesis is always the expected response to your research question. That's it. It's a declarative statement. It's never a question. Okay, well, thank you for that question because so many people have it in mind and no one actually asks. And this takes us to the beginning of the lesson, which is the experimental method. Let's have a look at the experimental method together. And let's try to understand the idea between the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And what's the story between them both? Um, okay, can we see some examples on that topic? Yes. Do you mean writing hypothesis, Farida? Producing one?
لا يعني generally يعني هو حاسة التوبيك ده is complicated فيعني عايز أشوف الأسئلة على طول يعني على كل part
Sure.
أو على الآخر
Sure.
أي حاجة بس
Sure. Sure. Definitely. No worries. No worries. That's
Okay.
absolutely great. It's not that complicated. It sounds fancy, but trust me, once you get it, it's very easy. And you will get it. So, what is the null hypothesis? Again, the null hypothesis is that statement that is null, zero. It says nothing will happen. Watching TV, if humans watch TV before bed, their quality of sleep doesn't get impacted. That's a null hypothesis. Nothing is going to happen. So, psychologists believe that studies of human behavior should be carried out in a scientific setting where, whenever possible, as much as we can, the most common method used in science to conduct experiments, that's it. We conduct experiments most of the time, and that's the most common method. Now, these sections, the following sections, show you how psychologists do this. And the first one is a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? A hypothesis, again, is a testable statement, not a question. And it makes it very clear what the researcher is investigating. A null hypothesis, however, is a general statement that says no things affect one another or nothing is happening. For example, what you watch before bed has no effect on how well you sleep. This is a null hypothesis. It says nothing affects anything. Scientists produce alternative hypotheses about events that they think are happening and then test these ideas. So the scientist actually writes a hypothesis, and that is called an alternative hypothesis, and then they test it. So I write something like watching horror before sleep will make you urinate yourself. That's it. Okay, this is my hypothesis. I just wrote that. Now, my job is to test that, to test whether these ideas are actually true or not. Any questions about the difference between the null hypothesis and the alternative one so far? Okay, no questions. Now, how do I formulate a hypothesis? Because you technically have to, under exam conditions, you're formulating tons of these. Most research in psychology, and also in sociology as well, but this is not the topic, but most research in psychology starts with an idea about how human behavior is affected by factors like personality, time, noise. Psychologists want to test those ideas in a scientific way, and sometimes an idea can be vague, very vague. Like, this is a research question here. Does listening to music affect how well students learn? Does listening to music affect how well students learn? My question is this blue line here, is this question a hypothesis? Is it?
Yes.
Okay, Ahmad Haytham said yes. After everything we've done, he said yes. It's okay, Ahmad, we can help you get it. But the ladies, can anyone help me? Any one of the ladies, please tell me, is this a hypothesis?
No,
No.
No, it's not. Why isn't it a hypothesis? What's wrong with it?
because it's a question. It's also a statement.
It's a question and it's supposed to be
Statement.
a statement. Very good. So what does the statement state? It states that changing the DV will affect the...
Music does have an effect on
The changing the IV, changing.
Okay, let's wait, Mariam Ayman. Let's give this to Dareen a second. Dareen, go for it.
listening to music affects how well students learn.
Listening to music affects how well students learn. Very good. Thank you so much. What's the difference between what you said and what's on the screen, Dareen?
What's on the screen is a question and it doesn't state if the IV has an effect on the DV.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. I love this. You guys are amazing. Ahmad, I hope you did understand the idea. I hope it makes sense. Okay, Ahmad is gone. So the researcher asks this question, there is this question, does listening to music affect how well students learn? And Ahmad wrote a follow-up something in the chat. He said, so a hypothesis is a statement where proving, not a question. Yeah, it's not a question. It's a... Yeah, exactly. That's what you said. Yeah. As I previously said it's never a question. It's just a response. It's stating that this will affect this. It's always a statement saying this affects this, this affects this. And then your job is to investigate whether this hypothesis is true or not. Now, so the researcher will always try to rewrite that vague idea into a more precise hypothesis. For the question about students who listen to music while learning, we need to identify the two variables. Okay, there are two variables that we are interested in studying. There's the DV and then there's the IV. As the researcher is going to conduct an experiment, the two variables have special names, and these are called the independent variable, which is the IV, and the dependent variable, which is the DV, the one you can depend on. And technically speaking, what will happen here is the two variables are something to do with whether or not there is music playing while studying is happening. This is the IV. Something to do with how well the students learn is your DV. So which one are we changing? The one we're changing, the one we're tweaking is your... Come on, I need someone to tell me. The one we're tweaking is our... What is the one we're changing? What is the one we're tweaking? What is the one we're playing with? What is it called?
The independent variable.
Thank you. And the one affected is my
DV.
DV. Thank you. So if I am under exam condition and Mr. Oxford tells me, you know what, we want you to, formulate a hypothesis, you will see that the IV, DV, and hypothesis and experiment are all related to each other. So when you design an experiment, you need to identify the IV and the DV. And there are some exam questions where they only ask you to tell the difference. They will ask you to tell them which one is the IV and which one is the DV, so that you can actually write them in a hypothesis. You can do this if you complete the following sentence. So take a look at this sentence. It says, the experiment is looking at the effect of this on that. Can anyone complete it for me when it comes to music? Only this one. The experiment is looking at this on that. Can anyone do it? Dareen just did it. Mariam Ayman.
The experiment is looking for the effect of music on academic performance.
Not music. Music's too vague.
The type of music.
No. There is a verb missing.
The effect of
Are we
listening to,
writing the music?
listening to the music.
Listening to music. Thank you. Be precise, Mariam. So the effect, this experiment is looking at the effect of listening to music while studying on how well the students will learn.
On academic performance.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So it's not a question, is it?
It's not, it's a statement.
So if I'm under exam conditions and I want to actually formulate a hypothesis, what am I looking at? What should I look for? What am I searching for first before I start writing? Malak.
Can I see an example of the hypothesis?
Yeah, but before you say an example, can you tell me which two things do I have to identify first?
Independent and dependent variable.
Okay, perfect. Very good job. So yeah, give me your example.
The experiment is looking at the effect of classical music on the brain while focused on studying.
Okay, that's a very specific hypothesis about a different, it's not the one we are discussing, right? Because
the
no,
music.
I don't remember mentioning classical music. It's
Can
music.
it be specific?
Yeah, you can. I mean, you're talking about a very different, you're testing a very different hypothesis then. You're testing a hypothesis about classical music only. Sure.
On the brain while studying.
Exactly. Yeah. But technically speaking, a better way of writing it is saying that classical music will do something to the brain while studying. And you will see this now. Good job. Good job, Malak. So the first gap in this sentence, the first gap here in this sentence, I hope you guys can see this sentence. I think you can. I'm not looking at you guys because I have this, and that, and yeah, anyways. So technically speaking, we have two different gaps. We have this one and we have this one. And my question here is, okay, check this out. What is the first gap? The first gap is filled with the IV, or conditions of the experiment that are being changed or manipulated by the researcher. The things I change, the things I tweak. The second gap, however, will be filled by my DV, or the performance of the participants the researcher plans to measure. So in the music study experiment, the answer would be, the experiment is looking at the effect of the presence or absence. And that's what you guys didn't catch, because we have two different conditions. You all focused on one condition, which is the presence of music. You forgot about the absence of music, which is the other condition that we're already testing as well. So the experiment is looking at the effect of the presence or absence of music on the score in a learning test. And that's it. This is a statement. This is it. It's not a question. And a very good hypothesis must have, again, not a very good one, well, a hypothesis to begin with, must have the IV, the DV, and the relationship between them, and as many different conditions as you will be looking at. So if you're looking at two different conditions, you have to mention both of the conditions. And we have a question here from Farida. Which Farida? Farida Muhammad, which
Tahir.
Farida is this? Tahir? Okay. Is Farida Muhammad Bahir here?
أيوة.
Okay, very good. Yes, Farida Muhammad Tahir.
هو لما when it asks me for a hypothesis يعني أنا I have to mention first of all ال IV وال DV و I have to mention ال presence وال absence بتاع ال IV.
Yes, if the presence and the absence of the IV is being tested, yes. The two conditions.
How am I supposed to know if it's tested ال absence وال presence?
Most of the statements we will solve together, most of the questions we will solve together will be very clear about this. It's not tricky, and I will solve them with you, and I will write the hypothesis with you. I think we have a schedule. I don't know when is the session we do this. Let me double check. So according to our schedule, let's have a look. According to our schedule, we're going to do this on the 13th and 15th of April. We will solve all the chapter 4 questions. So in 10 days from now, when we finish the entire chapter first. So we finish the theory and then we start practice. Okay?
Okay.
So let's have a look at this. This experiment is looking at the effect and the presence or absence of music. So the IV has to have conditions, and this is Farida's question, and that's why I took the question. It's a very good question. Farida is saying, so the IV, the one I'm changing, the one I'm tweaking, it has conditions? Yeah, it does. And the conditions can be compared. Music is present compared to music is absent. The DV has to be the behavior that is measured. So a test of some sort with a score. A test with a score that has to be measured. So does the IV have conditions? Yeah, the more conditions we have, the more we can actually know and tell how does it impact the DV. So for the music study experiment, the IV is the presence or absence of music, and the DV is the score on a learning test. And once you have identified the IV and you identified the DV, it's super easy to write a hypothesis. A suitable hypothesis for the experiment would be the presence or absence of music has an effect on the score in a learning test. That's it. Has a score. The presence or absence of music has an effect. Has an effect. It's not a null hypothesis. A null hypothesis says nothing will happen. Your hypothesis is stating that something is happening, something will happen. So the hypothesis produced for the experiment above about the effect of music on learning is called an alternative one. And it's because it is what the psychologist is interested in investigating. The null hypothesis or the null version of this hypothesis would be the presence or absence of music has no effect on the score in a learning test. So the blue one is a null one, and this states the idea that nothing is happening. And this is the statement that actually gets you triggered. And, this is the statement you're trying to prove wrong. You're trying to actually prove that something is happening. So you start with your null hypothesis to say, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. I do believe the IV has an impact on the DV. Let's take some questions here. Mariam, in English only, and please don't ask hypothetical questions. Okay, she's going to ask hypothetical questions. I think so. She didn't open the mic. I'm scared.
لا, you close the mic.
Okay.
If I'm asked in the exam, and I did get asked in في سؤال كده في classified to write a different hypothesis to a study. It asks about Yuki's study to write a different hypothesis. Then what do I do?
You write a different hypothesis. I'll tell you what. If I actually deviate away from the presentation now and open that classified, I know which assignment you're talking about, and I have corrected it. But I believe it's better to leave it to the exam questions session, because I will show you how to write an alternative hypothesis, okay? The IV tested and the DV tested in Yuki's study. So we have an IV, and we've changed that IV, and we saw the impact on the DV. What was the dependent variable in Yuki's study of emoticons? What was the variable?
Cultures view facial cues.
Are you sure? Was that the dependent variable? And what was the independent one? What did we change?
The independent variable, the culture.
No, how can you change the culture?
No, مش الculture بتاع ال students. The emoticons being showed, يعني how happy or sad. No, we were measuring how happy, the people were measuring how happy or
Okay,
sad.
see, do you get my point? Do you get my point? So relax, calm down. You're going to deviate. You will spiral out of control. Let's talk about that question when we have that question on the screen. Okay? Let's understand the concepts first before we go into the advanced past papers. Cool? Relax. Do you understand what I have just explained? The one about the IVDV
Yes.
formulating. Is it clear so far?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to take you to alternative hypothesis once we are 100% sure about formulating, a hypothesis to begin with. Okay, dokie? And I will solve that question with you because it was I think it was assignment 11, right?
La,
I think so. I think
la,
so.
la, la. It was before.
Before. Okay, I'll open it and check it with you off record. So let's have a look at the different kinds of experimental methods first. So different kinds of experimental methods. What do we have here? We have lab, field, and natural. Lab, field, and natural. I think your book hates lab experiments so much. I think it has like a love-hate relationship with every laboratory experiment. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Every time we are asked to evaluate a lab experiment, what do we get? What does the book say? Come on, let's speak in a
It's
general way.
because
Yeah.
it's accurate because all EVs are under control, but
Yeah.
it's inaccurate because it lacks ecological validity since any behavior that was conducted inside the lab wouldn't be done in real life.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And what would we say about field experiments?
They're ecologically valid because
Yeah.
any behavior done in them would happen in real life, but they lack accuracy because EVs aren't under the researcher's control.
And there are tons of EVs as well. Yes, exactly. Thank you so much.
Like external
Yeah.
EVs.
Perfect, Darine. You do get the idea. So every type of an experimental method has its pros and cons. But your book always repeats the same thing. Every single lab experiment we have, they're always happy with it because the results are accurate. And they're also not happy with it because they say, you know what? Maybe the people gave, come on, I always say the statement. You guys know what they gave. What did they give? The people in a lab experiment, what do they give? Demand characteristics because they knew they were in a lab, so maybe they didn't behave normally. Anyways, there are different kinds of experimental methods. We have the lab, the field, and the natural one. Let's discuss them together. All researchers try to carry out experiments in controlled setting. So everyone is trying to have like controlled settings so that they can be sure that only variable that affects the DV is the IV. That's their ultimate goal, to make sure that the only variable affecting their dependent one is the independent one. However, it's not always easy to control every other thing that could affect the DV. It's not easy. A lab experiment is an experiment carried out in a highly controlled environment, like a laboratory. In this case, the setting is often artificial or not where people would usually produce this behavior. A field experiment is a setting in which the behavior would normally happen if the researcher is looking at the possibility that the clothes someone is wearing affects whether they are helped or not when they fall over. Can anyone tell me which study was that? It starts with a P. Come on.
Study.
What?
Palvin study.
Bolivian subway study.
Subway study. Okay, what were the two conditions? In one condition, the person was homeless with a scar and drunk. And in the other condition, the actor or the Confederate pretended to be, I think, had a walking stick.
Or like had a disability.
Yeah, perfect. Now, what about the lab experiment, the most famous one in our book, the one you guys like so much because you're also...
Milgram's obedience study.
I knew you were going to talk about Milgram. All of you guys, you love that study. Let's electrocute some people. Okay, so Milgram study was a lab one, and the field one about the clothing. We know that it's the subway study. Also, not the subway study. There was another one. Come on.
Levine's
football supporter one.
Levine's football supporter study.
Football supporter study, absolutely great. So technically speaking, the researcher might have Confederates, okay, Farida Beher says, can we consider the B study a lab one? No.
Why
No,
not?
there are, look, it's a field study. It's not a lab one. No, 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 no. There are some things that were artificial, like the glasses with the sugar water in them, but it was in the real world. I mean, the bees were actually marked with colors and they actually had to watch them and monitor them. And if you go back to the notes of chapter 5, the notes I actually, our notes, I can open the notes for you now. We actually mentioned the type of that study in the notes, and I'm just opening the file. Sorry?
It was a field experiment.
Exactly. It's not a lab study. It's not done in a lab. We said it's a field experiment. Let me just go over the notes to make sure that was included in the notes. Let's see. Okay. Performed. Yeah. Field study. It's in the notes. It's in the notes. I think it's in page. My computer froze because I opened so many tabs.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. It's in page 15 of your notes, and I even have a picture of the man in the notes. Yes.
Wasn't the field study designed so it can be like a lab study?
No.
يعني it doesn't go if we just say in it's a lab study.
No.
Oh.
Why would you say it's a lab study?
I'm not saying it's a lab
Are-
study. I'm
No,
saying
are they inside a lab? That's a question.
but the field was designed
Mhm.
be like a lab.
To test their natural behavior. They didn't know that there was a Confederate. They just saw a person falling and they were going from one location to another. They didn't even know that they were being tested, right?
Mm.
They designed a decoy. They told them that there is another study. And once they're done with that study, they left the building and they walked. And that's when the real study happened. Do you understand me?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's it. Now, when it comes to the B study, again, I did double check again. I'm just going to show you. من اللي أنا خفت تكون مش موجودة في notes. That would be extremely horrible, but it is. Thank God. Again, it's page 13. I think you guys can see it on the screen. Page 13, and it says it here. This was a field experiment conducted in the bee's natural environment. Can you see it? Now, when we talk about the football one, where's the football one? Where's the football one? This one, again, there were two conditions. So condition 1, the jogger wore a Manchester United shirt. The jogger 2, condition 2, the jogger wore a Liverpool shirt. And the method was participants were Man United fans and they witnessed a jogger fall and act injured. Technically speaking, this happened, it's high ecological validity because it was in a real world setting. Unsuspecting participants, it wasn't in a lab, okay? So that's the whole thing. Was it in a lab or was it not? Now, there are 3 different ways to actually conduct an experiment. We have the lab, we have the field, and we have the natural one. Now, a field experiment is a setting in which the behavior would normally happen. So if the research is looking at the possibility that the clothes someone is wearing affect whether they are helped or not, and this was the football supporter study, then the researcher might have confederates, actors, people working for them who follow a scripted behavior of falling down when wearing clean or dirty clothes, like the subway one. Now, we have a lab, we have a field, and now we have a natural experiment. But before we move on to the natural experiment, I'd like to say that the pedestrians who are around when the person falls are people going on with their normal day. They're just shopping, they're just in the subway. The response to the fall will be their normal behavior. So the IV, which is whether the person needing help is dressed smartly or not, is still controlled by the researcher, okay? Now, a natural experiment is one in which the IV is not under the control of the researcher. The researcher cannot really control the IV that much. It happens when the conditions of the experiment are already fixed, such as studies looking at gender or age differences. When the behavior of males and females or younger and older people is compared, the researcher doesn't determine which participants are in the different age or gender group. So I can't just say, Mariam Ayman, you're going to be in the old people group. I can't determine this. I can't do this because you are young, you know? I cannot control which group you fall under. It's determined by your age and it's determined by your sex. So technically speaking, it's not me who controls the IV, sorry, it's a natural experiment. I do not have a say. And there are different ways of using people in an experiment. Okay. The researcher has to decide which experimental design would be the most suitable to test their alternative hypothesis. Why do we call it alternative? Because it's not the null one, it's an alternative one to the null one. Sometimes the design chosen is determined by the hypothesis being tested. For example, if the researcher is comparing the self-esteem of males and females, then there would be all males in one group and all females in the other group. In another investigation, the researcher could decide to have the same people in both conditions or use different people. So it depends on the people you're using. Your experimental design can be different depending on what you are trying to test. Am I trying to test the difference between males and females? Am I trying to test the difference between millennials and Gen Z? If I'm testing the difference between millennials and Gen Z, I would actually separate people according to age and not gender then. So experimental design is how you actually, put people in a certain group. Now, Farida says here, how do we relate this to research methods? Like, how do we do this? Like, okay, that's a good question. I don't really get, I understood your question in one way, but I need you to elaborate on it more. I need you to explain it to me more. What do you mean?
يعني is this a part of how, يعني how to measure يعني how to make a research ولا
Yes, because technically speaking, the experimental design, are you talking about the experimental design only or how to actually?
لا والناس كمان اللي هو يعني how they're looking وكده.
Oh, this is the previous slide or this one?
لا the
تعالي.
previous.
The previous one, this one? Just a second. This one?
Oh, this.
This one mentions that you have three main experimental methods, whether it's a lab or a field or a natural one. Each one of them has its own positives and negatives, and each one of them is used in a different way for a different purpose. That's it.
Yes.
That's the whole takeaway. Okay, Malak.
It's kind of an irrelevant question, but are we gonna finish after 10:30?
Oh my God, Malak, we're being recorded. You know what? I'm gonna cut this out of this session. Okay, I'm gonna make a short out of it, and I will leave it as a story forever.
That's so offensive.
Yeah, I know. True. Okay, so I'm gonna finish when I'm done. Don't worry. Let's just focus. I know that you guys are tired. It's a very heavy topic. No, but we have to finish it. So, technically speaking, the three types of experimental design. We have three types of experimental design that we're going to talk about, and these are called independent groups, repeated measures, or matched pairs. We have independent groups, repeated measures, matched pairs. These are the three experimental designs. So the independent group, in this design, people who are available to take part in the experiment usually are divided into two groups. So I don't really like divide them. I have people who are available and I divide them into two different groups. One group takes part in one of the conditions and the other group takes part in the remaining condition. Can anyone explain this using the music study, the one I mentioned about music? Can anyone help me? How would we actually have independent groups according to the music study? Mariam Ayman in English, please.
Would have one group listen to music while studying and another group not listen to music while studying.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Are you really going to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. That's group. That's absolutely correct. So, technically speaking, in a music study experiment, one group of people would learn with music present, and the other group of different people would learn without music present. That's it. So that's independent groups. Now we have a question here from Farida.
هو مثلا يعني can I say 10 people are going to study with music and 10 people won't study with music in the independent groups?
Yeah, if you have like 20 people, do you have 20 people?
No, I don't know. If
Let's
it's
imagine you have
repeated,
20 people.
if it's
You're going,
repeated measures,
yeah,
يبقوا 20 are they gonna study مرة with music and the other time without?
exactly. All the in the repeated measures one in this design, there is one group of participants, and these participants take part in both conditions. So when we have the music study example, زي ما انتي قلتي برافو عليكي, all the participants would learn some material with music present, and they would also learn some material without any music present. برافو عليكي. طيب لو جينا بقى للmatched pairs هنعمل ايه؟ In this design, the people who are available for the experiment are tested before they take part. The test is used to match people into pairs. Each pair is made up of two people who both have similar qualities, like we have Farida Muhammad Beher and Farida Muhammad Tahir, for example. And I think they're going to kill me now. So they could be identified as pair A, pair B, pair C. One member of the pair will take part in one condition, and the other one will take part in another condition. So if we have Farida Muhammad Tahir, Farida Muhammad Beher, with a music study, I put them together in a pair because they're very similar name, similar age. I think they're both grade 10. And I take both of them because they have the same hobbies, the same education. And both of them are put in a pair. One of them studies with music and the other one studies without music. Okay? So technically speaking, even though the people in the two groups are different from the people, are different people, the researcher treats the data collected if each pair, okay, each pair of scores came from one person. So in the matched pairs, we consider Farida Muhammad Tahir and Farida Muhammad Bahir's results as one person. And technically speaking, with a matched pairs one, identical twins are often considered to be perfect matched pairs in psychology research. Whenever they are in doubt, they get like twins immediately. And they put each one of the twins under different conditions. Can you tell me which twins study proved that something isn't right? A genetic explanation. A genetic explanation of what? Do you guys remember?
The OCD or PTSD one.
In chapter 7.
Yeah.
So the genetic explanation of it, when they had twins, what did they figure out?
That they don't get PTSD or OCD because of genetics, I think.
No, they do, but like the probability, okay, their genetic susceptibility, their probability of getting this or that, okay, wasn't only determined by their genetics, but there were other factors involved. So even though they were twins, they didn't have the same exact numbers.
I have a question about the independent groups.
Sure.
Do we pick the people in the groups depending on like gender, age, and كده يعني ولا do we pick them randomly?
Okay, you know, that's a detail that we're going to study next.
Oh,
So yeah, you can actually do this or that. You can pick them randomly or you can actually classify them.
so it just depends on what the researcher really wants.
Exactly.
Okay.
And each and every single one of them has its own strength and weakness. And it's on the screen. And I want to show you this because this table summarizes the whole thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have like 3 of them. You're absolutely most welcome. I thank you for being here, by the way. So we have, I'm not being sarcastic, I swear. I swear. I know that you wanted to attend and the timing wasn't right.
I know, but I left a biology Zoom to be here, so
You ditched a biology?
yeah.
Okay, no comment, but Happy to have you. So independent groups. I don't know why my presentation keeps moving on its own, but the independent group, let me check. Maybe I clicked on automation. Did I click on automation? How do I not automate this? Okay. So independent groups. There are no order effects because people, oh my God, how do I stop this from moving? Does anyone know? It keeps moving on its own, guys. Let's try to restart it. Farida says, you stop it. You get it done. You don't even know how to run a presentation. Okay, she has a point, but she didn't need to be so aggressive about it. Okay. Can you guys see it now? Can you see it? Anyone?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
For some reason, it keeps moving. Do we have like any people here who are good with the PowerPoint? Okay, display setting. Oh yeah, I paused it. Perfect, I found it. You can actually pause it. I didn't know that. I actually did. Okay, you can see it now, right?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so we have the strength and the weakness. Let's have a look at this. So in the independent groups, there are no order effects because people only take part in one condition. Often the same material can be used for the task in both conditions, and the participants cannot work out the aim of the study because they only take part in one condition. So how many, good things about the independent groups, the strength we have? 3. Do I need to know them? Yes. Do I get them in the exam? Yes. They will tell you what is, the 2 strength and 1 weakness of using independent groups, and you have to know them. Now the weaknesses, there are different people. So the participants are different and the 2 groups are different from one another. So maybe tons of EVs in the 2 conditions. So maybe that's why the results are different. And you need more people for the study. And to get 10 in each group, you need 20 people. So you're going to pay tons of money if you're paying people. Now, the repeated measures, the people in both conditions are the same. So there are no participant variables. You only need 10 people to get 20 results because each person produces 2 scores. But this is a problem. There are order effects as people have to do 2 tasks. So maybe doing task A before task B might have an effect on them or might have changed something. And you may need 2 different tasks. They cannot learn the same word list twice. And the participants may actually figure out the aim of the study, and then they would actually ruin the study for you because people have a tendency of giving demand characteristics. Now, the matched pairs, the strength of it is participant variables are reduced. There are no order effects. It's the same material, and it can be used for both people. Matching is so difficult, time-consuming, and not always successful, and some participant variables are still present. Do I need to know this by heart? Yes, you do. You really do. And this takes us to the next slide over here. What is the standardized procedure in experiments? As you've seen, an experiment is a carefully organized procedure. So if you're trying to standardize the whole thing, a set of sequence is applied to all the participants when necessary. This makes the experiment unbiased. Okay, I don't let one person go first, one person go second. We have a sequence, and it means that the researcher is trying to control all the variables and events so that the results of the experiment can only be related to the IV. Now, the final thing I need you to understand is EVs, extraneous variables, and their possible effects and how these can be controlled. Extraneous variables, guys, are variables other than the IVs that might actually affect your dependent variable if they are not controlled. And if you go back to the music study experiment, some EVs are things other than the presence or absence of music that might affect the learning score. And these are some problems. First of all, time allowed to do the test. If participants in the music present condition have more time than those in the music absent condition, then the time could be an EV. The time could actually affect the score of the exam. Maybe they actually did better because they had more time. The results would be due to the fact that people in one condition had higher learning score because they had more time than people in the other condition. And the solution would be to allocate the same amount of time for doing the test in both conditions. Now, the difficulty of the question in the test, if participants in the music present condition have easier questions, then they might actually get better scores, and it's not related to music. One solution would be to use the same set of questions in both conditions. Another would be to have two learning tests, but of the same equal difficulty. So extraneous variables are, pretty interesting, and they do affect your DV, and you're trying to eliminate them because you want to see the effect of your IV on your DV. And another issue that a researcher must consider when standardizing the whole thing is the instructions given to participants. They must make sure that the instructions is clear and the instructions are actually the same, and the verbal information said to the participants and the written information is the same for all the participants. So, and the information that is said or written for the participants might affect the way that the study actually takes place. And it might affect the scores, the performance, and it could be an EV. So the usual practice is to write as much of this information as you can to ensure that participants get the same information. Your exam boards, Oxford, Cambridge, and Pearson, they do this on the cover page of every exam. They have the same instructions to the participants, and even when the British Council staff read these instructions, they have to read from a script so that we make sure the instructions given are the same to all the participants, so these instructions do not affect your score in the end of year exam. So there are some things you need to understand. What is briefing? Briefing is what is said, written, to encourage a person to agree to participate. It contains ethical information about you consenting to the experiment, you being anonymous, you having a right to withdraw from the experiment if you don't like it anymore. Now, the standardized instructions are the clear instructions about exactly what the participant will have to do in the experiment. And debriefing happens and explains the study in detail so that each participant is absolutely sure of the aim of the study. That is why they were doing what they were doing in the conditions. Also, ethical issues are addressed again in the debriefing, especially the chance for the participants to leave or withdraw their data if they feel unhappy about their performance or they don't want people to actually, share their results. So technically speaking, participants must be debriefed fully to make sure they understand their role and they understand their rights. Now, in order to be randomization, it means making sure that there are no biases in the procedures. I'm not choosing a certain order because I like a certain person, or maybe I'm doing an extensive experiment on so many students from so many different schools. So I get students from the school I like best to do it first so that they can go home early. No. So we do randomization in order not to be biased. So for example, this might be used when the researcher has constructed a list of 20 words for the participants to learn. These words are equal difficulty because they are all everyday nouns with 6 letters. Now, the researcher has to decide the order in which they should be presented to the participants. Instead of the researcher choosing the order, randomization is used so that the choice of the researcher doesn't affect the study. All 20 words are written on a separate piece of paper and put in a bag, and the first word is pulled out of the bag and written down at the top of the list. This is repeated until all 20 words have been put on the list. The order of the words has now been randomized. Each word had an equal chance of being selected first for the list, and the researcher left the final order of the words to complete chance so that the researcher bias doesn't become an EV. The researcher has to be sure that all the participants are presented with the words in the same order, and that order is absolutely random. Now, finally, we have random allocation, which is an important issue in how participants in a study are put into conditions. Random allocation is how participants in a study are put into different conditions, condition A and condition B. Why did I put Farida Muhammad Tahir in the condition where she doesn't listen to music and Farida Muhammad Bahir in the condition where she listens to music? Why? Well, I didn't. Random allocation is the researcher, it's when the researcher doesn't have any influence over which participant goes to which condition. If the researcher chose which participants were in which condition, it would be a bias, it would be a form of bias. And the results might be due to this bias rather than the IV. So when we design an independent group, the researcher can use random allocation. And this was Dareen's question. How do we group people? You can use random allocation. Okay, to achieve this, if 20 people are available for the study, the researcher can put 10 pieces of paper with condition A and 10 with condition B into a bag, and then each participant takes a piece of paper from the bag that determines the condition they take part in. And this random allocation removes bias. In a similar way, using matched pair design, the researcher will allocate the people in each pair randomly. This could be achieved by putting the 2 letters for a pair in the bag and getting one participant to select a letter. This is then repeated for all the pairs. And this actually allows them to, for example, the person who got the capital letter, Farida Muhammad Bahir, gets condition A, and Farida Muhammad Tahir gets condition B because she got the small a. Of course, with repeated measure design, there is no random allocation. Repeated measures, we cannot have random allocation. Why can't we have random allocation in repeated measures? If you understand, you can answer this. Why can't we have random allocation in repeated measure? Think about it. Yes, Mariam Ayman.
How would we randomly select the same people? Because in repeated measures, we repeat the experiment on the same people.
Exactly. So each participant has to complete both conditions. So I can't really have random allocation because the same person is going to go through all the conditions. There is no other procedure that is used to make the experimental design less biased. That's it. Now, the final thing you have, yes, Dareen, I swear this is the final thing. I swear, the final slide. Yes.
Can we use random allocation to pick the main participants for repeated measures and not for the second part, like for the first part to get the main participants?
In which way?
Like to get the participants من الأول, we use random allocation, but we don't use it again عشان ما نغيرش conditions.
Do you mean in repeated measures?
أيوة يعني.
How؟ ما هو كلهم هيعدوا بالconditions.
لا
نفس الشخص, the same person is going to go through both conditions. Random allocation random allocation is me choosing which person goes through which condition. تعالي ناخدها بهدوء. يعني أنا عندي الستادي بتاعت الميوزك, the music study, okay? And I'd like to study to see whether the music affected the exam grade or not. ماشي?
Okay.
Random allocation happens when I do not choose which person goes to which condition. I leave it to luck. حلو؟
Okay.
طيب, how can I use random allocation in a repeated measure design? ما هو في repeated measure design انت كدارين هتعملي الاكسبيرمنت مره with listening to music ومره without listening, فانت كده هتعدي في both conditions. فهمتيني؟
Okay, thank you.
random allocation, لا انت شكلك مش فاهماني وبتهربي, انا شاكك فيكي.
والله فاهمة بجد.
يعني random allocation انا بختار مين اللي هياخد
one goes to which condition.
بالظبط, بينما كده اصلا في repeated measure design كل الناس هتعدي في both ايه؟
conditions.
بالظبط. That's it. فهنا بقى بيحصل حاجه اسمها counter balancing. لو انت عايزه تخلي الاكسبيرمنتال ديزاين, لو انا عندي الاكسبيرمنتال ديزاين اسمه repeated measure وعايز اعمله مظبوط قوي, I want to actually get the best results, what should I do? I do counter balancing. When the experimental design is repeated measures, all the participants will have to take part in both conditions. So we have seen this might cause order effect. لو انا عندي فريده ودارين سمعت مزيكا الأول وبعدين امتحنت. Okay, so Dareen listened to music first and then Dareen took the exam. Okay? And in condition B, Dareen studied without music, and then she took the exam. Now I have Farida. Farida did condition B first. She didn't listen to music at all, and she took the exam, and then she listened to music and took the exam. ايه اللي بيحصل هنا؟ Order might have affected the results. Okay? Maybe when Dareen listened to music first, she was bored in the second condition. It impacted her. And maybe when Farida studied without music first and then she studied with music, maybe the music distracted her. Maybe it was, it had an effect on her. Or maybe she was tired of the music. Technically speaking, when I have the same person going through both conditions, حلو؟ يعني فريدة لما بيكون عندي نفس الشخص هيعدي في condition A و condition B، بعمل حاجة اسمها counterbalancing. Half of the participants بيعملوا condition 1 and then condition 2, and the other half بيعملوا condition 2 and then condition 1. And this will not get rid of the order effect, but it will make sure that the effects are equally balanced between the two conditions. بصوا كده. Random allocation, independent groups, okay? Condition 1, condition 2. Male and female, okay? So condition 1, male, female, male, female, male, female. So this is random allocation. We have like 2 females, 2 males, whatever. Now, counterbalancing مع repeated measures. هعمل ايه؟ هعمل condition 1, female, male, female, male, and then in the second condition, I'm actually going to change that. So technically speaking, this is condition 1, and then condition 2, condition 2, and then condition 1. عشان أشرحها بطريقة بسيطة, I'm going to use 2 names, okay? 2 names. Let's use 2 names. Let's say Ahmad and, I don't know, Ahmad and, let's go with Farid, مثلا, because we have a guy called Farid in the chat. So, Ahmad and Farid. Ahmad has to go through both conditions, condition A and then condition B, okay? But Farid will go through condition B first and then A. Why am I doing this? This is called counterbalancing. I'm doing it to make sure that the order doesn't have an effect. Well, the order will still have an effect, but at least my results are so varied so that, I actually get numbers that I can rely on. Now, there is a strength and weakness of the experimental method. It is important to remember that there are many strengths as well as weaknesses to the experimental method. And this is an exam question. It comes in every exam. Evaluate the experimental method. Evaluate the experimental method is to mention its strengths and weaknesses. There is no best way of finding out about human behavior. So researchers choose the most appropriate method for their investigation. That's something you need to keep in mind. And this is your evaluation. This is one of the most important questions in the exam this year. And, the whole thing is worth 50 marks. So what is the experimental method? Let's talk about the lab experiments, strength and weakness. Let's go through this first. I swear this is the final slide, but I need your attention, please. This is coming in your exam. So let's begin first with the lab experiment, okay? This is the lab experiment. Come on, let's evaluate the lab experiment. Strength, lots of control over EVs, okay? Meaning it's easier to establish cause and effect. Why? Because I'm only measuring and I'm only sure that only the IV, which is the independent variable, affecting the DV, which is the dependent variable. Okay? There is a high level of control and standardization, which means the experiment can be repeated and replicated and the results can be confirmed. There is high objectivity because the chances for bias are reduced in the standardized procedure. The weakness, however, the settings can be artificial with unrealistic tasks, so there is a lack of ecological validity. Participants are aware they are in a study, so their behavior can be affected, so the results may be misleading or lack of validity can happen because their behavior might not reflect their usual actions, and we call this giving out, what do we call it again? Giving out what do we call it, guys? Demand characteristics. Thank you guys for not helping. Now, the field experiment, which is the second one that needs to be evaluated, okay, the field experiment, and you will have to evaluate the field experiment, and this will get you tons of marks, by the way. The setting is natural, realistic tasks, high ecological validity. There is control of the IV, even some EVs, replication is possible. Participants are unaware they are in a study, so their behavior is not affected, and the results will be valid, and it was the real behavior. Now, the weakness is there is a reduced control over the EVs, meaning it's harder to establish the cause and effect relationship between the independent variable and the dependent one. And we're not sure whether only the IV affected the DV or not. The final one is the natural experiment, the natural experiment, which is interesting because you don't really have control over lots of things. But the natural experiment, the IV is something that naturally happens, like your gender or your age, or maybe the language you speak. So this is the only type of experiment that can be conducted, because I'm testing whether your age or your gender or your language affected something else. So there is a high level of control. All the variables except the IV are standardized, meaning the experiment can be repeated and the results confirmed. There is a high objectivity because chances for bias are reduced because there is a procedure that is standardized. Oh my God. It's a standard thing. Now, the weakness is there is no random allocation of participants. I can't randomly allocate them because they're either males or females, or maybe they're teens or old people. So I can't. The IV is not under my control. And the setting is artificial with unrealistic tasks. So there is a lack of ecological validity. And participants are aware that they are in a study, so their behavior can be affected and the results can be misleading or lack validity. This is your takeaway of the lesson, this evaluation here, this table on the screen. If you get it, you just got yourself tons of marks. And when a question asks you in the exam, how might the researcher allocate participants in a study randomly to the conditions? You must give practical description. You must actually describe, just like I described using Farida Muhammad and Farida Muhammad. You have to give a practical description of what should the researcher do in detail. You will not get any marks if you just suggest a method. If you just say something like, use a computer program, thank you, and the computer program will randomly select. No. Your answer must state how such a program would be used and how would it actually, get the whole thing done. If you are going to get some questions, these are some example questions. We will solve all the exam questions together, but these are just examples. They might tell you to describe how a researcher could use repeated measures in a study where participants are all timed, okay, sorting cards. So that's one thing. You will also write a suitable hypothesis for an experiment. And you will briefly discuss the strength and weakness of using an experimental method, any one of the experimental method, which experimental method. They can actually ask you to use the strength and weakness of using a lab study, a field study, or a natural experiment, any one of those. So you will briefly discuss the strength and weakness of using this method to investigate a certain study in your exam. So they will actually give you a specific experiment, and then they would ask you to evaluate whether using one of these three, what's the strength and weakness of using one of these three, whether it's a lab or a field or a natural experiment. If you get it, you get it. And that's it. This is the longest chapter, the longest lesson in chapter 4. The other ones are lighter if you get this one. So I will leave this recording. I'll also leave the course book section because Oxford leaves it for free on their website. They clearly have, this is their sample chapter. So we will leave this with the recording, in addition to my summarized notes that can actually help you get the takeaway, a tiny table that summarizes the whole thing, and some bullet points to help you actually memorize and study this chapter. So I would like to thank you all for bearing with me. I know it's a long chapter, and I'd like to thank you for being here today. I will take your questions off record, and that's it. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you on the next one. Let's close this meeting together.